Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Leading in an Echo Chamber. It's going to be hopefully a very exciting and actionable debate that we're going to have this morning on things that we can actually take away and implement hopefully in our own organizations in the sector more broadly. So mining sits at a genuine inflection point, not just because of critical minerals, energy transition, or geopolitics, but because of the fundamentals of how we lead, fund, staff, and communicate the sector. We talk a lot about these issues amongst ourselves, and I sat on this very stage last year talking about the mining's image problem, and Andrew, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think the theme of last year was echo chamber, right? So here we are again talking to ourselves about issues that need to change in the industry and how we communicate to others. So I'm really privileged to sit here with such an extraordinary panel of leaders in this space that hopefully we can workshop this and come with some actionable points at the end. So we have Jody Kuzenko, who is the CEO and president of Torex Gold, Shaun, Usmar, the CEO of Vale Base Metals, Fabian Baker, the MD of Kingsrose Mining, Bill Oplinger, the CEO and president of Alcoa, and William de Landtsheer, the head of business development for Traxys. I also do want to say on this panel we have two nominees for Leader of the Year, Shaun and Jody, so hopefully that's a good sign for the industry that you guys are both with us, and thank you for bringing your expertise to the panel this morning. So Shaun, I'm going to start with you actually. We talk about leadership, and when we spoke before, you talked about a Greek tragedy of a risk-adverse boards and a missing generation who haven't yet built or integrated mines. If you're advising a board on its next CEO, what do you think they need to prioritize, and what should we stop doing when we're appointing CEOs in the space?
Yeah, thanks for that.
Yeah. Let's get right into it.
Yeah, firstly, the irony of being in a mining conference audience talking about an echo chamber is...
It's good, right?
It is good. Okay, sitting on boards and obviously being on the executive side, I think we're at this moment that on the one hand is such an exciting moment in time. We've got governments reconnecting with where our supply chains are. We've been unconscious in thinking about these things for so long. And in the meantime, we've seen the Chinese do incredibly well at being able to take a longer term view and frankly outcompete us. So it sort of strikes me that directors often go for that echo chamber of talent, which very often has a deep pool of experience from another time. And we seem to have a lost generation in many ways where we've been focusing on share buybacks and other things where we haven't necessarily marshaled and developed the talent to be able to bring in and help the next generation of mine builders, explorers, business people to come through. So I think the challenge for there is if we want a different outcome with people and leaders who are going to take these organizations into a place in the age of AI, geopolitical tension, fragmentation, we have to look for different answers. And it's not to say that we don't have great talent. I think that the challenge for us in the future is we're probably going to have people who have the courage and the imagination to be able to bring the best of the understanding of our sector, more of a business orientation, strategic orientation, a geopolitical perspective, but at the same time, candidly, are courageous enough to realize that there's so many answers we don't have. I think we're often defined as a sector by our worst moments. Those become the tailings dams, the fatalities that often define the sector. Unfortunately, become a barrier for us attracting great talent. And we have a generation now with youth unemployment and so many issues, people looking for purpose. We have the ability to have profound positive impacts on society and frontier communities and that. So having worked with generalists as well as specialists, I think the answer has to be some people who can actually bring the best of our people, engage with our stakeholders, and ideally that we can broaden that net to look more broadly outside, and also not make the mistake of thinking that the answer needs to be someone who doesn't have a background. Because in my experience with some of that, there's a thing called the Dunning-Kruger effect, and it's often embodied in some of that talent as well.
Yeah, thank you, Shaun, and I think that naturally leads me to Jody. You are noticeably the only female we have on the panel today, barring myself. And back to Shaun's point around sort of, where we're getting our next slate of talent, you've often spoken about this dismantling the club. on many occasions, right? What practical changes should boards and CEOs make to stop reproducing the same leadership and open space for general disruption, following on from the comments from Shaun?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the key considerations is how, and I use the vernacular of the club, how the club got established. And over the course of history in mining, it started out as being a very technical industry. And so out of that came the need for deep technical engineers and deep technical experience. And so what happened was, as mining started to emerge and leaders started to surface, there became a bevy of what I describe as white male engineers between the ages of 40 and 65 that made their way through the mining industry and now sit at the top of the house of most mining companies. There's nothing wrong with that, especially. I work with a lot of white male engineers between the ages of 40 and 65, but I think the issue is that the mining industry has moved along, and it's no longer just a small circle of technical issues. Wrapped around that, in what I would describe as concentric circles, are deeply complex social issues in terms of managing the unions, geopolitical tensions, leading communities, what your workforce wants. A workforce now wants to be connected to something more broadly than just drill, blast, and mug. They want to work with purpose. And so there's a myriad of social issues that are associated with leading a company. And then there are also commercial issues. So the way we think at Torex is, what is the technical, what is the social, and what are the commercial issues? And if you've ever sat in a room with investment bankers talking about financing a deal or doing a transaction, the complexity of the commercial issues, even in today's supply chain, has become very significant. And so I think the importance of dismantling the club is sort of a shorthand for saying, could we do better than hiring friends and family? Could we do better than hiring people who only look like me and think like me? And how do we do that? I don't believe the solution lives in creating your own club. So women move over here and they create their own club and they start to build that up. I don't believe that's particularly productive, because what it does is it creates this condition where people look at other groups as other. And then you get the kind of backlash you got associated with diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then you hear things today like, we don't do DEI here, we hire on the basis of merit. What a garbage thing to say. Merit is not the opposite of DEI. The opposite of DEI is sameness, inequity, and exclusion. There are no rounds of applause for that. Nobody thinks that's a good thing to do. And so I think that for boards and people in positions of power, first you have to be mindful that there is the existence of a club. You have to be mindful of the fact that there are broader demands of the industry that require more than just technical thinking. And very simple things like creating a pool of people, a pool of candidates from which to choose your next role holder, from which to choose your next CEO. And at Torex, when we have a pool of candidates and there isn't a woman in the pool, I send my team back. Go back, find a woman. And the reason often that there isn't women in pools is because they tend to self-select out. Women look at job applications. If there are 10 criteria, they've got 9.5 of them, and they say, no, that's not the job for me. Men look at job applications. If there are 10 criteria, they've got 1 or 2, they're like, man, I am the man for that job, right? And so there tends to be biases in these processes that boards and CEOs and people in leadership positions need to wake up to and start to deal with them in a very intentional way. When you start to open that up and open up the aperture to allow other people into the pool, slowly, other trades, other experiences, other genders, other walks of life, indigenous groups will start to make their way into the industry. And I think when you have a mixed set of views and a mixed set of experiences leading mining companies, the outcomes can only be better. And that's supported by data over the last 10 years in an irrefutable way.
Great, thank you. And Bill, as someone who is in the club, maybe? I don't know.
I think I resemble that. I'm under 40.
I didn't want to assume age. That's not what we're here to do. From your perspective, and I want to kind of bridge the gap between sort of leadership and access to capital now with you. How much of mining's poor valuation is actually about weak leadership narrative rather than price cycles? And what do you think CEOs should be doing differently?
So I think there's probably two answers to that. The first answer is around performance and performing in a manner that's safe, sustainable, stable. And so in order to get a higher valuation, it has to start with real strong underlying performance. And so that's the first point. Second point I would say is that we need to do a much better job as an industry advocating for the industry. And we do that to some extent on our own. We're doing it to some extent through some industry organizations. But when you look around this room today, none of this exists without the extractive industries. And so you can just look around and touch everything and realize that the extractive industries, and I'm including oil in that also, is the basis for our modern society. And we just don't do a great job of advocating for ourselves. People don't understand that. And I think ICMM, we're a member of ICMM, they're going to do a much better job. They've done a much better job of advocating for the industry, but it can't just be alone. And when you look at the premium valuations, now we're not going to ever get a Palantir type valuation, but when you look at the premium valuations, people need to understand that so much of the supply chain of the entire world starts with our industry.
Mm-hmm. Great. And following on this sort of theme, William, you've seen project finance become slower, thinner, and more painful. Now states are stepping in. How has state involvement changed the way projects get funded, and what are the risks of that to the sector?
Well, we do indeed see the banking industry not slowing down, but refocusing on greener proposals, which is better viewed in the market. And we always come back to the concept of social license, acceptability of the mining industry as a whole, which doesn't have a good reputation. I mean, you just walk the ground in the streets, you will see people that are seeing this industry as a cause for pollution, and as you just said, do not realize that actually without tin you don't have phones, without steel you don't have buildings. They live in it, but they don't realize that this industry is a basic. So when we address funding needs of companies that have a project, and it's always the conundrum to find the right mix. So when you talk to banks that used to be very strong in project finance, they are still there, but I think that number is dwindling down. We do see the emergence of specialized funds as a replacement or complementary liquidity that could make up for the increasing gap that we see in the market. Some of them are in London, here in New York, and they are pretty aggressive, but they do a good job. They do a good job because they know exactly what we're talking about. They are really good specialists. They are more expensive, but as long as the project takes off, I think everybody is happy about it. We have seen recently intervention of public funding, something pretty new. I mean, historically, there was always a view that public funding is not the right tool because it bypasses sometimes proper analysis of project's viability. Now, the thing is different in the context of onshoring some assets closer to the customer base and not relying too much on very far away processing capabilities. We do see, particularly in Washington, in Brussels, money flowing in to co-invest with industrial parties to develop assets closer to the buyers. We see that a lot in the US. It's very aggressive. It's been there for 3-4 years now. And I think the trend will continue because everybody understands that indeed having a production next door is way better than relying on the very far away producers. And in a way, it's also better from an ESG perspective less transportation, less pollution, much higher visibility on the capacity to deliver and service the customer needs. So we see really a shift in the way people think, and that pushes a change on how the business is organized. Now it's really by region. US is stronger in that respect. EU is always lagging behind because it's not one country. It's 26, 27 countries, and they have to come to terms for every sort of investment, so it's slower. But it's slowly getting there, and we do see now this kind of partnership kicking in.
Great.
Which is a positive, to be honest. It's about time.
All right. And Fabian, you're sort of coming at this from a slightly different perspective to the rest of the panel because you're working in exploration. So when we spoke before, you've sort of argued that explorers need capital that accepts failure. What has to change in investor expectations or deal structures to allow explorers to fail fast and still be considered successful?
Yeah, absolutely. I come at this at the earliest stage, looking at exploration, and we're here talking about the echo chamber and how do we break out of it. I've recently had the opportunity, after nearly 20 years exploring in different sort of environments, to take a bit of a step back and actually think about this and reflect on, well, what are some of these root causes that cause us to be where we are today? And in exploration, the word expectations, I think, is key. Funding comes with certain expectations, and that leads to certain behaviors. And particularly in the smaller end of town, in the junior capital markets, capital tends to come with an expectation of short-term return, which prompts explorers to essentially try and shortcut the process, get hold of known assets, play it safe in their exploration, and ultimately the chances of that leading to a step change in a major discovery is very small. And if it is successful, we're doing it in probably the slowest and most cost-inefficient way possible. So failure is inherent in exploration. And people talk about exploration being high risk or low odds of discovery. I was thinking recently about, actually, these are two different things. The odds of a prospect becoming a mine one day are very small. Risk implies a process where there's a potential negative outcome, which in this case would be spending lots of money and not making a discovery. Well, in a low odds environment, the riskiest thing you can do is test very few prospects. And when you do test them, play it really safe. So I think there's a real opportunity right now to reimagine what the exploration business looks like and essentially align expectations with what good exploration requires. And so that's what I'm trying to do. And just to give you a flavor of that, I think at the earlier stages, being a private company makes more sense. Again, having your shares publicly listed at those really early sort of R&D stages introduces capital that may not be aligned with those longer term goals. You need to remain nimble and agile. We really value people and creating a diverse team with skills, and that's our superpower. And again, that often gets viewed as a cost in other environments. And then for us, the key to this is partnership. We're in an environment now where there's a huge ecosystem that surround this mineral industry, and there's so much to be leveraged by working together. And so that's what we're trying to do, is find the best of big and small, change the expectations around what exploration looks like. And that actually allows you to see that, yes, we've got to have a laser focus on the end result. Let's try and make a discovery. But, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Let's break it down into a process that we can understand. And those steps along the way, how do we assess whether they're successful or not? And so I think adjusting expectations, and particularly the expectations that come with capital, is going to be a real opportunity to unlock a much better sort of new paradigm in how we do exploration.
Fantastic.
Can I just build on that, Nichole?
Yeah,
I think
please.
it's really important because you're talking about adjusting market expectations as relates to exploration. It happens later on in the life of mine as well, and where I think it's really predominant now is market expectations as relates to major capital projects. This industry doesn't have an excellent reputation for delivering capital projects on schedule and on budget. One of the key problems is that investment seeks only a return, and your investors are looking for certainty. And so when you have that kind of push as relates to exploration or projects, there's a real incentive for companies to try to do things faster, try to do things cheaper, try to take shortcuts and deliver results that the market is expecting. The same goes for projects. And NI 340-101 has this real incentive to deliver returns that look better than 30% when your whole resource may not be drilled off. If this industry was consistently delivering 30%, there would be thousands of people in this room, not the number of people here. And so I think it's incumbent upon us as leaders in the industry to shift the narrative on matters like exploration and capital projects, that when you put out a feasibility study and the return is only 15%, 16%, for us to train the market and say, look, there's more resources behind what we've built this infrastructure for, and the return will come over time. That's the nature of this industry. But that's not what happens. What happens is people try to shorten project timelines. They cut CapEx with an axe, not a scalpel. They take shortcuts on sustaining capital, and you end up with this Frankenstein of an NI 43-101 that is not a realistic pathway for what you are going to build. And then 2 years down the road, 3 years down the road, you need more money, you need more time, and the market gets disappointed. And so I think what he's pointing out in terms of setting expectations or hitting the reset button with capital funding on exploration needs to be done at the major project level too, because investment at its core is about trust. And if you can't trust people to deliver on realistic expectations, then capital won't come to the industry. So I think that's a really important point. It happens through the life cycle.
Shaun, Bill, or William, do you have anything to add to those 2 points?
Yeah, look, actually, I think there's cross-cutting themes. And the business I was in prior to this, I did a startup in 2016 that was really focused on attracting capital to the sector, which is underserved, because I agree, people, generalists don't understand risk. We've failed to actually advocate for the sector in a way, and candidly, we're a long-term capital deployment business. We've had a poor track record, and I think the only way you're sustainable is ultimately if you know how to run a good business, and you can advocate, you can attract talent, and actually give a more optimistic view of the future and the ability to actually do more for society and how people can actually find purpose in that. So to me, part of that, and I think governments are grappling with this right now, we're ultimately having to build a portfolio of things which are going to put the odds of success more in our favor.
Right.
And I think, unfortunately, if you put all your baskets in, or your eggs in the basket of highly speculative, long-run things where you need infrastructure in a system that is so atrophied, our ecosystem is truly atrophied. We have a talent shortage, and yet we haven't embraced. We've weaponized things like DEI. We need as many talented people as we can get, and we need to make sure that we deliver every damn quarter, and that we actually aren't afraid to, lay out the bare truth, and also think in terms of scenarios and uncertainty, because none of us can forecast the future. And so optionality, helping people understand that, and being able to actually put some meaningful risk capital while we're trying to fix the permitting timelines and that, which I think is part of the barrier to getting the sort of capital you need. Because who wants to put money in now knowing that it might be a mine 20 years from now or never? So I think there's a lot that's consistent across this, and I think it's actually something that's quite exciting in this moment for those who can do it.
And Bill, actually, and I guess, Shaun, you just mentioned about, bringing talent into the industry. Alcoa specifically competes with tech, energy, and advanced manufacturing for talent quite frequently, I would imagine. What have you learned as CEO about attracting people who didn't grow up in mining? How are you getting them to work for Alcoa or just generally into the space?
So we've done a lot over the last couple of years around changing our culture and really trying to make sure that people outside of Alcoa understand the cultural change that we've had. We are looking at attracting people outside of the industry, and we've been pretty successful in our leadership team to have attracted folks that are outside of the industry. When I'm talking to folks outside of Alcoa, I make sure they understand that Alcoa is a very relevant company globally. We have global operations that attracts a certain type of person into our industry. We are really, as I said earlier, at the epicenter of so much that's done in the world. So when you look at flying in a plane, driving in a car, staying in a hotel, that all starts with aluminum. And in addition to that, the cultural change that we've tried to make within our company is really to have people understand that they can come to a relevant company and make a huge difference. And so that's been our focus. I do just want to comment back on Jody's comments around DEI. We've not slowed down any of our DEI work within Alcoa. Yeah. And the reason why we do that is very simple, and I'm sure a couple of you will nod your head. And that is, we think it makes us more successful, right? That's all there is to it, right? We're not doing our DEI initiatives to make the world a better place necessarily. What we're doing them for is to make our company significantly more successful. And we talk about some of the challenges, and Jody and Shaun specifically. I don't know that anybody puts forward a 30% IRR project in aluminum. They just don't even exist.
It happens in mining a lot.
We're in an extremely challenging industry, and we need the absolute best and brightest in the industry. And so where as other companies, other industries are walking away from those initiatives, we're actually seeing it as a potential strategic advantage to be able to bring in the best and the brightest, because it is such a challenging part of the industry, and that's why we do it. So those are the things that we're working on.
And William, so you sort of alluded a little bit to some geopolitical pressure on DEI initiatives and why some companies, especially in the United States, have pulled back from that. William, moving to Europe and sort of the government, you said that you've noted strong public resistance to projects in Europe while supply is pushed offshore. What would be a more honest conversation with voters look like about the trade-offs of mining at home versus exporting impacts?
Well, I think just to come back to the onshoring concept, we do see now a bit more momentum. The issue in Europe in particular is that everything takes a lot of time because there's, if I can use that expression, a lot of red tape, right? There is, right? It's a fact. We have just to embed that into our thinking process. So Europe has always reacted rather than leading, so reacting to external issues or shocks. So here today, I think we are coming into an era where it's more logical, it's more acceptable that the public and private business comes together to create new capacities and to show to people that actually this industry is a normal industry. I always say when I look at the young generation that most of them go to the service industry, to the service business. They don't really go to the industrial businesses, and within the industrial businesses, mining and processing is very particular. So we do have an issue of attracting people that understand that this is a good place to work in and that they can grow their talents. So we navigate between long-term constraints, growing appetite for the development of these new industries, regulations that are coming on the recycling, which will be, I think, in Europe very potent. There's a requirement for 2050 that 100% of the metals are recycled. Don't really know how to get there, but at least it gives a trend, it gives a direction for people to work around it. And we do see lots of discussion about secondary production of metals rather than primary production of metals, and looking at the resistance of people in the EU having this kind of two different sources of production. I think it makes a lot of sense because you can hedge your bets in a way. If permitting takes a lot of time to get assets from the ground, the recycling usually is faster. So I'm more and more optimistic. I was a bit pessimistic because of the timeline it takes to make decisions. But I think today is going in the right direction. Funds have been created to accelerate the business. Private sector has to team up with the public sector to increase the speed of those investments. But access to capital is always key, as we discussed just before. I always say to our suppliers when they want to launch the development of assets that raising money is a strategy you have to tackle early on. Sometimes they are so busy on technical matters that they push those discussions a bit on the side, and what you don't want is to end up in a situation where everything is kind of finished, properly analyzed, properly documented, and you're still lacking the financial strategy, financial sources to launch your project. I'm not sure I answered exactly to your question.
That's all right. I just want to get to me.
So Lauren, I'm sorry, Nichole, if you don't mind me jumping in, one of the things that we think about when we attract talent into this industry, and one of the things that I try to emphasize on new people looking at coming into our industry, is that if you want to change the world, right, and so many young people have a purpose of that they want to have an impact on the world. If you want to change the world, come into mining. It's as simple as that. Don't go into banking. Sorry for all the bankers in the audience. Don't go into consulting. But if you want to have an impact on the world, you should come into the extractive industries. We have so many challenges. What to do with tailings, what to do with residue, how to apply the product, how to make the world better, how to reduce energy consumption, how to decarbonize. If you want to do that, the place to do it is in the mining industry.
And actually, Jody, you guys at Torex are extraordinarily successful in Mexico with a 99% local workforce. And you were telling me about your engagement specifically with young women between the ages of 10 and 13. Can you maybe briefly tell us why you've been successful there and how you see that impacting your future talent pipeline?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that Torex will change the world, but we're certainly changing the communities in which we operate, which is true of many operations in remote locations. One of the most interesting and fascinating things about mining is that you got to go where the ore is. You don't get to set up in a city like London or New York or Toronto. And where the ore is today, particularly, the easy ore has been taken in the major centers, Sudbury and other places like that. But today it tends to be in very, very remote locations. Our mine is in a place called Guerrero, Mexico, in the Guerrero Gold Belt, equidistant between Acapulco and Mexico City, which is essentially the middle of nowhere. When we arrived there in the early 2010s, the population was subsistence farming and subsistence fishing. And it's a very difficult postal code. Mexico is widely known, widely reputed for having organized crime issues. And that was true and real and remains true and real in the state in which we operate and in Mexico more broadly. What you're hearing today, political rhetoric about dealing with that in sort of a confrontational, violent kind of way, to me isn't getting at the underlying solutions to the underlying problems. The underlying issues are poverty, access to opportunity, education, access to an honest day's work for an honest day's pay. And so what mining does to these remote communities that are beyond the reach of federal governments and provincial governments and state governments, what mining does is create a pathway to opportunity. So what we've done at Torex, recognizing that, and typically when you build a mine in these remote locations, if you build it, they will come. But that sentence, the they in that sentence is young men, because there is a presumption that young men will come to work in the mine. Mining is no longer an industry where you need a strong back or really big physical build. You need dexterity, and you need to be thoughtful, and you need to have some leadership capabilities. And so what we found in Guerrero is that if we went out and identified young women and explained to them, you have a place here too. We have created the conditions for you to rise here too. And explain that to their families or their husbands or their partners and got them early enough. And the trick is to get them early enough, because the default future as they become 13, 14, 15 is to participate in something that isn't as productive and contributing as mining. So you got to get them early enough. We did that. We started to build a program. And then the real trick is we started to build a program around haul truck drivers. Who's going to drive our 90-ton open pit haul trucks? We found an ambassador. We found one woman and one male superintendent who were prepared to be ambassadors of the program and send those people out into the community to tell two friends, and then the success story got created from there. It has been so wildly successful, the World Gold Council filmed a documentary on what we're doing in Guerrero to uplift communities, and in particular, uplift young women. It's called Gold, The Journey Continues. If you're interested in it, just Google it, it's on the website. But I think it's critically important that mining be a part of the solutions that are befalling society today. This is why I'm so resistant, Nichole, to the critical minerals discussion that's happening. I mean, anytime we can get mining on the platform of political people in positions of power or of society, the vehicle today is critical minerals. What that ends up doing is creating some short-termism in the thinking. What's critical today? What's the supply and demand story today? What do we need today? What are we doing with China today? And my view is that the conversation should be elevated to the criticality of mining, not this mineral versus that mineral. They'll all be important at some point. And the story I just highlighted about the difference our company makes in one small corner of the world amplifies for me the criticality of mining.
I have time for one more question, Shaun. I'm going to give it to you, and then hopefully we have time for one or two questions from the audience. Shaun, I'm going to give you a hard question here. What is the one thing our industry refuses to admit to itself?
Oh, wow.
That's how we're going to end.
Yeah.
Tough question.
Look, I think of the journey I just started. I left a company I founded to take on this VBM journey. And I think a large part of that was, on the one hand, recognizing that there is a moment here where the world is waking up to this, and I don't disagree with Jody's points. I've lived in both base and precious and bulks over time, but it's there. And I think the one thing that we struggle with, and I look at our journey, the first thing is we often tell ourselves like about our exceptionalism, or we graded all these different things, the good that we do, which I think we do within society. But I think the thing we first have to step back is actually look at ourselves in the mirror from our outside stakeholders, because I think it'll make us better business people, it'll make us better able to create some sense of ambition and excitement again that will attract the next generation of talent. The problem otherwise, we're going to get stuck in a perpetual echo chamber, I do feel, with the same level of thinking, the same level of it's not fair. And if we're better business people, better advocates for our sector, able to go to the grassroots in schools and universities and elsewhere and help people understand both the impact that we have on society, take the damn time, rather than just find ourselves getting caught in the usual suspects of meetings and so on. I think if we face those hard truths, it's amazing what we can tap into in our own organizations, in our societies. I tell our teams in Sudbury and around the world at the moment that we've been mining there since 1886. Mm-hmm. I've got third-generation miners with their fourth-generation daughters working underground right now. They're incredibly proud members of the community in that. But I tell my leadership that we're writing a chapter or two of a much longer story. Right. And what happens at this moment under our version of this is going to determine whether there's another 3 or 4 chapters ahead. This should be a time of optimism and excitement. We shouldn't be dwelling as much. I think what you look at is ultimately what you're drawn to. And if you can change our mindset and actually look to a far more exciting, ambitious future, which I think is being presented to us, it's complicated. We need more risk takers. We need people who are prepared to actually integrate different levels of thinking. I think it's an incredible opportunity, and I don't think we're really having those conversations yet.
All right. I think we have time for 1 or maybe 2 questions. Is there 1 question? Sorry, Andrew says 1. There's time for 1 question. Does anybody have a question for the panel?
Question?
You can ask them anything.
Ask me. What would you like for Christmas? Okay, I'm going to ask a question. Our next speaker is Martin Sorrell from the advertising industry. What's the one thing you want to learn from him during his talk? Very, very quick file, starting with William and going along.
Sorry, I didn't get your question.
Our next speaker is Sir Martin Sorrell, who's a leading advertising guru from the last 30 or 40 years. So obviously he's a leading expert in terms of brand and brand image. What's the one thing you're hoping to learn from the next speaker?
Do you want me to take that one for you?
Yeah, because I'm not sure I know that question.
I actually am glad to hear that Sir Martin is here. I didn't realize that. He was on our board of directors for a number of years. He's a good, close personal friend. And the question that I would ask Sir Martin is, what do we need to do as an industry that there you are. As an industry, what can we learn from your industry to make sure that we advocate better for this industry? And that, to me, is where you can help us, right? I look at the empire you built at WPP over decades and just say, hey, what can we learn from you as an industry? How do we do it better? Sorry to take
No, that's the right question, yeah. So about PR.
Can I say? What I would like from him is, how do we push our leaders and our CEOs to be more confident, to be disruptive, and to be a little bit more provocative and get out there, again, outside of our own industry? You see other sectors like technology do this so well, and I think we used to have more mavericks in this space, rightly or wrongly, but I think we're lacking a little bit of that je ne sais quoi at the absolute top of the space, and it'd be great to understand how we can give our board of directors and leadership confidence that they can go out and they can push buttons and they can try to move change forward. Any other comments on that, guys?
I think you've just given what I understand in the backdrop. How do we do a better job of making authentic connections with our many stakeholders? And understanding that it's not the one-size-fits-all. Everything feels like it's world-class, low-cost, highly undifferentiated after a while. I think people will tune out.
Yeah. And I'd just add, sorry, that I think this comes down to a concept of trust and understanding, and so through spreading the word of what we do, that's how you build those things. Everyone, I would assume in here, to an extent, understands the integral role that mining plays in our lifestyles, and that's because we understand the industry and we feel like we have a level of control or agency around our relationship with it. So if you are working amongst communities that don't understand it and they don't feel like they have any decision-making power, of course you're going to get mistrust and you're going to find it really hard to progress. So I think how we advertise and educate to create the environment for us to operate well is a really important thing to consider.
Great, thank you. And if you guys can give a round of applause to the panelists, that was fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.